You've done it thousands of times without thinking. A slow exhale, a cloud of smoke rising into the air, a feeling that the world has softened slightly at the edges. You probably think of cannabis as a modern habit, a product of counterculture, something invented in the 1960s, or smuggled out of Amsterdam. But the truth is stranger than that, much stranger. Because the first human beings to deliberately breathe in cannabis smoke were not hippies. They were not teenagers. They were not even farmers. They were mourners at a funeral, standing in a mountain valley in Central Asia, nearly 2,500 years ago, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The story of cannabis and humans is one of the longest relationships in recorded history, and it begins not with smoking at all. It begins with a plant. Cannabis sativa evolved on the steppes of Central Asia, the vast, windswept grasslands stretching from modern-day Kazakhstan eastward toward China. Scientists believe the plant and early humans coexisted in this region for tens of thousands of years. But coexisting is not the same as using. The first confirmed evidence of humans intentionally cultivating cannabis comes from China, around 10,000 years ago, the very dawn of agriculture. People along the Yellow River Valley were growing it, not to get high, to make rope, to weave cloth, to press oil from the seeds for cooking. For thousands of years, cannabis was just a useful plant, sturdy, fast-growing, practical. It was not special. It was not sacred. It was just there, growing faster than most things around it, stronger than most things around it. A plant that asked for nothing and gave back everything. Then someone discovered what happened when you burned it. The oldest direct evidence of cannabis being burned for its psychoactive effects was discovered in 2019. A team of archaeologists led by Yimin Yang at the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences published their findings in the journal Science Advances. They were excavating a 2,500-year-old cemetery at a site called Zherzhangal, high in the Pamir Mountains of western China, near the borders of modern Tajikistan and Afghanistan. This was not an easy place to reach. Even today, the Pamir Mountains are remote, cold, brutal. At elevations above 4,000 meters, the air is thin, the winters are merciless. And yet people lived here, traded here, buried their dead here. Inside wooden braziers, the researchers found residue, small wooden boxes designed for burning. They analyzed it using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, a technique that can identify chemical compounds in ancient materials. What they found was unambiguous: tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the compound responsible for the psychoactive effects of cannabis. And this was not wild cannabis with low THC content. The chemical signature matched strains with significantly elevated potency. These people were not burning cannabis by accident. They were selecting it, cultivating specific varieties, choosing plants with stronger effects. This was intentional, deliberate, sophisticated. Think about what that means. These were not primitive people stumbling around a campfire. They understood what this plant did to the human mind. They understood how to grow it stronger. They understood how to burn it in an enclosed space to maximize the effect. 2,500 years ago, long before modern chemistry, long before anyone had a word for THC, they already knew. But why a funeral? The Zherzhangal cemetery was used by people connected to the Silk Road, traders and travelers who moved between east and west, across some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. Archaeologists believe the cannabis burning was part of burial rituals, a way of communicating with the dead, of sending the soul onward, of helping the living process grief. Cannabis was not a recreational habit, it was a sacred tool. And this pattern repeats across cultures, across continents, across thousands of years. Whenever humans encountered this plant and discovered what it could do, they did not use it casually. They used it carefully. They wrapped it in ceremony. They gave it meaning. But Zherzhangal is not the beginning. It is just the place where archaeologists happen to find preserved evidence. The real origin of psychoactive cannabis use is almost certainly older, much older. To understand why, you need to understand where the plant came from. Research published in 2021 in the journal Science Advances by a separate team led by Luca Fumagalli at the University of Lausanne analyzed the genomes of hundreds of cannabis plants from around the world. Their conclusion was striking. All modern cannabis traces back to a single domestication event. Every variety used for fiber, for food, for medicine, for recreation. One place, one population of humans who first cultivated the plant, and that place was East Asia, roughly 12,000 years ago, at the very start of the Neolithic period, when humans were just beginning to settle down and farm. 12,000 years. That means cannabis has been a human companion since before the pyramids, since before writing, since before the wheel. The question is, when did those early cultivators discover what happened when you threw it in a fire? Here is where the evidence becomes harder to read. Researcher Ethan Russo is a neurologist. He has spent decades studying the history of this plant. He argues that the discovery of psychoactive effects was almost certainly accidental. You gather seeds near a fire, The plant burns, the smoke drifts, and something changes in the people nearby. This kind of discovery has happened countless times in human history. Fermentation, caffeine, psilocybin mushrooms. The first encounter is rarely intentional, but once discovered, these effects were not forgotten. They were remembered, passed down, ritualized. The ancient Scythians knew this. The Scythians were a nomadic people, warriors and horsemen who dominated the Eurasian steppe for centuries. They had no cities, no writing system, no monuments that survive, but they had rituals, powerful ones. Herodotus was a Greek historian writing in the 5th century BCE. He described a ceremony he had witnessed or heard accounts of. Scythian warriors after a burial would build small, enclosed tents. They would place red-hot stones inside, then throw hemp seeds onto them, then sit inside the steam and smoke, howling with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed Herodotus was exaggerating, making it up. The Greeks were known to embellish stories about foreign peoples, to make them seem exotic, barbaric, strange. So for a long time, the cannabis tent story was treated as legend, a colorful detail from an unreliable narrator. Then the Dzerzhankal discovery confirmed it. People in exactly that region, exactly that period, were doing exactly what he described. Herodotus was right. And if Herodotus was right about the Scythians, it raises a question about everything else he wrote. What other ancient habits are hiding in plain sight, dismissed as exaggeration, waiting for an archaeologist to prove them true? By the time cannabis reached the ancient world outside Central Asia, it carried two identities simultaneously. In ancient India, it became soma, or rather, one candidate for soma, the sacred drink mentioned in the Rig Veda, one of the oldest religious texts ever written. The Atharva Veda dates back to around 1500 BCE. It names cannabis directly as one of 5 sacred plants, a guardian, a releaser of anxiety. The Sanskrit word for it was bhang, and bhang was not whispered about in secret. It was offered to the gods, consumed at festivals, used by priests to reach altered states during ritual. In ancient India, cannabis was not a vice, it was a gift. In ancient Egypt, cannabis pollen has been found on the mummy of Ramses II, the most powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history. He died around 1213 BCE. Residue consistent with THC has been identified in the tissues of multiple mummies. The plant was being used medicinally, ritually, perhaps recreationally. Egyptian medical papyri dating back to 1550 BCE mention cannabis as a treatment for inflammation, for pain, for glaucoma of the eyes. These were not witch doctors guessing. These were physicians, working with real observations, real patients, real outcomes. 3,000 years before modern medicine, they had already figured out that this plant could ease suffering. In ancient China, around 2737 BCE, the legendary Emperor Shen Nung reportedly recommended cannabis tea for gout, rheumatism, and poor memory. The Shenong Bin Cao Jing, the divine farmer's classic of materia medica, is one of the oldest pharmacological texts in human history. Cannabis appears in it not as a curiosity, but as medicine, documented with dosage and purpose. The ancient world did not think of cannabis as dangerous. They thought of it as powerful. That is a very different thing. Dangerous means to be feared. Powerful means to be respected, handled carefully, used wisely. The ancient world chose the second framing. There is something important hiding inside all of this history. The cannabis these ancient peoples used was not the same as modern varieties. The Dzerzhankal samples showed elevated THC, but the plants of that era were shaped by natural selection and early cultivation, not by decades of intensive selective breeding. Modern high-potency strains are a very recent invention. The chemical journey from the Pamir Mountains to contemporary dispensaries is not a straight line. It is a winding road across 12 millennia, through China and India and Egypt and Greece, and Persia and Arabia and Africa and the Americas. Shaped by every culture that touched it, changed by every hand that grew it, but the impulse is ancient. The human desire to use this plant to alter consciousness, to mourn, to celebrate, to heal, to communicate with something beyond the visible world. That impulse does not belong to any one century. It does not belong to any one culture. It is older than all of them. So the next time you hear someone describe cannabis as a new problem, you can offer them a correction, a modern vice, a trend that needs to be contained. The relationship between human beings and this plant is not measured in decades. It is measured in millennia. 12,000 years of cultivation, 2,500 years of confirmed psychoactive use, documented by Greeks, preserved in Chinese tombs, woven into Indian scripture, prescribed by Egyptian physicians, written into the oldest religious literature on earth. Every civilization that rose and fell in that time left some trace of this plant behind, in their medicine, in their rituals, in their graves. You are not standing at the beginning of this story. You are somewhere in the middle, in the plant, unhurried, resilient, older than every civilization you have ever studied, has been waiting here the whole time.